Hello, everybody. You guys can hear us okay? Yeah, good. All right, thumbs up. Valeria, can we do a quick roll call?
Absolutely, Chris. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We have Chris, Renee, Julie, Bruce, Emily, Annie, Marcela, and then we have presenters Kaylin C. And I am so sorry if I'm get to not pronounce your name correctly, Anna Jane Yolkin. Welcome, everybody. If I missed anyone, please let me know so I can capture that in our roll call. Otherwise, we can move forward.
We're missing Gino Zamora and Mary Louise.
Who are excused.
Okay. Sounds good. We were going to do approval of the minutes, but we have to make some additional corrections to that. So we're skipping that. So we're on to communications from the co-chairs. Renee, did you have anything?
No, I'll be sending, well, I'll say that for the working group updates. I don't have anything.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Valeria for the presentation and everyone that either gave input or clearly participating in this. Committee is part of that, but it went well. There weren't any questions, not many questions anyway, so looks like everyone seems to be pretty happy with our work. And I think Julie at the meeting where we did the presentation, oh, there's Gino. Hi, Gino. If we can mark Gino down. Julie informed us that the contract with UNM had finally been approved. Do we have any more updates on that, Julie?
So now the contract is being vetted through UNM's legal. Our legal signed off on it with their legal changes. So I sent the contract administrator for UNM a request for an update. So hopefully I should get something from her tomorrow, and I'll send out an email on Friday with the updates.
Okay. So our legal approved the changes that they have made, so they should be okay with it, but Julie will keep us updated on that. Any communication from Valeria?
Yes. Hi, everyone again. And welcome, Gino. I will be sending, as you our action item email follow-up tomorrow, and I would just like to have some confirmation for upcoming presentations for the remaining of August and September, and wherever possible for October and November. So expect an action item email from me. Thank you so much. And I think
That's Monica. We forgot about that. Monica, we didn't call Monica. All she is excused.
okay, no, I have her down. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So go ahead, Chris.
Oh, sorry, did you have anything else from communications?
Not at this point, but I will follow up via email. Thank you.
Lee, did you have anything from the city?
I was gonna go ahead and send an updated calendar with all the calendar dates upcoming for the rest of this calendar year. And I'll go ahead and send that out on Friday. I did get the closed captioning on Zoom, which was a work of technological magic. So I'm glad I have that set up for better access. And I believe that's it. And I'll have the meeting minutes adjusted for the next meeting in 2 weeks.
Great, thank you. Next, we're on to presentation, the Overdose Prevention Center expert panel. Emily, did you want to say anything before we get started with the presentation?
Yeah, thank you. And good to be here. I want to welcome Kaylin and Anna Jane. They have agreed to present tonight. They're both on the East Coast, so we have to big props for coming out so late for this important work. I wanted, before I introduce them and they'll talk, I just wanted to remind folks that we did have a mini presentation on the alternatives to policing drug use. And one of those recommendations was to expand harm reduction services in the city of Santa Fe, which included overdose prevention centers. Folks may have heard it, it's often called supervised consumption services or overdose prevention programs. We're referring to it tonight as overdose prevention centers. And just a reminder of what we mean by overdose prevention centers. These are legal, safe spaces for people to consume pre-obtained drugs under the supervision of trained staff without fear of arrest, with access to sterile consumption equipment, overdose reversal medication, drug checking tools, as well as connections to critical health and social services. So with that, I'd love to I know Kaylin and Jane will do their own introductions, but both Anna Jane and Kaylin are important allies and partners to the Drug Policy Alliance. And so our organization has worked closely with both of them for many years, and just thrilled to support their advocacy and success in this space. Because it's really, they're really leading the way for the rest of the country on the implementation of these really important sites. Anna Jane is the Director of Programs at Weber Renew, which is Rhode Island Center for Harm Reduction and Recovery Services. And they provide peer-led harm reduction and recovery support services. And Kaylin C. is the Senior Director of Programs for On Point NYC. And as we talked at our last presentation on this subject in 2021, New York City opened 2 supervised, or I need to get that, overdose prevention centers, one in Harlem and one in Washington Heights, East Harlem, those neighborhoods. And so we're very excited to hear how that has been going. Opportunity for us to think about whether this is a model that's right for Santa Fe and what that might look like. And Anna Jane really led being the first state to actually pass statewide authorization legislation to authorize the opening of overdose prevention centers in Rhode Island. So we have a lot to learn. Thank you both for being here. And also, I'll just mention that just yesterday afternoon, California sent their bill to the governor's desk. So yay, Rhode Island. Usually it's California or New York that those 2 states that often lead in some of this reform, but thanks to Rhode Island for paving the way there. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kaylin and then Anna Jane, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Great, thank you. And hi, Anna Jane. I'm going to jump into a presentation sort of halfway through it because we don't have a ton of time. Do I have screen share abilities? I think I do. Oh, I don't actually. I wonder if we could
enable. Is it at the bottom, the green share screen icon?
That says it has disabled it for participants. It might be an easy fix for the host to lend me those privileges for just a few minutes. I don't know if that can happen.
Yeah, I think Julie.
There, perfect, done. Somebody fixed it. Okay, all right. Let me see if I can make that. So as I said, we're going to jump in kind of at the halfway mark for a much bigger presentation because we don't have a ton of time. But I just wanted to touch on a few things. One, that overdose prevention centers are an infinitely scalable and adaptable intervention. And that's one of the things that make them such an important resource for our strategic planning around the public health crisis of the overdose overdose crisis. They can be fixed site like the ones that we have in New York. They can also be a medical model. We have that. We also have a peer and consumer-led model. That's our Washington Heights site. They can also be co-located within housing and shelter. And I've worked and helped open examples of this in Vancouver, Canada. I know that this is a model that Santa Fe might be interested in. It can also be co-located within a medical facility or a hospital. We have a hospital here in New York City that is considering this option. There's also an OPC embedded within a hospital in Paris, also embedded within a hospital in Vancouver, Canada as well. And what's so amazing about that model is we find miraculous things can happen when you actually enable drug users to access healthcare a little bit more on their terms. That bouncing away from healthcare, discharging AMA, is really reduced when people can access and utilize their drugs of choice safely while sort of engaging in care, which is a human right. It's a human right to access medical care and to finish medical care. And that's often a really difficult kind of tension or point of tension for people who use drugs, except for in these unique circumstances. It can be co-located within a detox or treatment program. And this is my favorite thing to talk about. This is Insight, where I used to work in Canada. On the ground floor is the safer consumption site that at its height was seeing 1,500 visits a day. The second floor, operated by the same harm reduction program, operated by the safe consumption site, was detoxification services. And then on the top floor was long-term treatment. It isn't antithetical to co-locate these kinds of services together, harm reduction services and more abstinence-based services. In fact, it works really beautifully because it allows to capitalize on that very short window when some sort of conversation around recovery may be happening post-overdose. We're no longer needing to refer out or add people to wait lists. Those services are available immediately on site. And this is one of the most successful and heavily studied overdose or safer consumption sites in the world. There can be a mobile model, and this can look a lot of different ways. So I've got a couple examples up here of our old mobile model and then the mobile model in Montreal. On the right, you see the aftermath of an overdose intervention. This was a morning where we had 11 overdoses within an hour and a half and 2 simultaneous cardiac arrests. Somebody had put borax in the drug supply. One of the dealers came and let us know that this was happening, and people started just dropping one after another at our mobile vehicle there. Everybody survived, and we had feedback from EMS that they would no longer be dispatching ambulances to us because our team was so effectively triaging this intense and unrelenting medical emergency that they were going to divert their rigs, their ambulances, to other parts of the neighborhood to triage those folks. So the mobile model can be very, very effective. And then the virtual model, you all know about this. Here are a couple examples of some of the virtual programs that are popping up. Never Use Alone is operating across the US and Puerto Rico. And then the Brave app is an example of what's happening in Canada. And this is essentially sort of a souped up version of FaceTime with some patient-directed functions. So you can see in the middle of your screen that the caller is notified if the user is not responsive, but the person who is consuming drugs controls the interaction. So you can press I'm okay, the green button there you see in the center of your screen, but if you don't within a certain number of seconds, the next phase of the initiative will be activated, which is dispatching an ambulance to your geolocation so that you can get care. These are all versions of safer consumption. So specifically in New York, how do our sites work? There are a couple very unique features of our sites that are a little bit uncommon in safer consumption. Our sites are polymodality and polysubstance, meaning you can use any substance you want in any quantity through any mode of administration. That means you can smoke, snort, sniff, swallow, or otherwise ingest your drugs of choice. We don't provide drugs. That's up here just in case there is still anyone in America who is under the illusion that we also provide drugs. We do not, although we are big believers and proponents in safe supply, but that's a little bit of a different conversation. Splitting is permitted. This means you can come in with a friend and split a dose. This is our answer to people who are in survival drug use or really entrenched in poverty and sort of the street scene. Who may need to engage in dangerous behaviors to acquire money to purchase their drugs. So this would be women in the survival sex trade, people who are stealing from local businesses. This is an effort to sort of really address the community's safety as well as the safety of the people who are consuming drugs. This is also our measure to control drug dealing in and around the sites. Safer use assistance is permitted. We really view that as a very important public health education tool and a point of connection with a very vulnerable population. So we do a lot of safer injection assistance. We do a lot of sighting veins, teaching people about the hierarchy of veins, and really focusing on the technique of safer drug use with the intention of preserving the main systems in the body: neurological, cardiovascular, respiratory, and then just the health of the skin, tissues, and muscles. There are no time limits in our site. Time limits are a luxury of having an overdose prevention center. They allow people to relax, engage with our health educators, our nurses, really take a moment to practice safely and to think about dosing to prevent overdoses. All of our staff are highly trained, even at our Washington Heights location, which is our consumer-led location, meaning most of the folks working on that team are active drug consumers themselves. All of our staff are trained to respond at the level of a registered nurse. We really believe in giving those paraprofessional skills, or these professional skills to paraprofessionals, to be very effective in our programs. We're very low threshold. We don't ask for ID or any proof of identification, and our registration into the program is minutes long. That doesn't mean that it's not thorough. It means that it's low barrier and meant to attract and enroll the participants that are in need of this particular service. We don't have a bar policy. We don't have security guards. We don't have police. We don't have metal detectors. We have strong policies around conflict de-escalation, and we do something called the opportunity to correct, and we use the 24-hour clock. And we don't really have too much time to get into that, but it's a very holistic approach to behavior modification that works very well in our sites and allows us to be very, very busy working with a population who is not without their challenges, without relying on traditional security mechanisms. The greatest thing about the OPCs from a community perspective is that everything that we give to participants in the OPC to consume drugs stays in the OPC. This means way less public injection, way less discarded syringes on the ground, way less use in parks and public spaces. We often say the least interesting thing that happens in the Overdose Prevention Center is the actual drug consumption. The most interesting thing that happens is the beautiful booth side care that becomes very fluid and organic when you have a captive audience consuming drugs the way they want to in a safe environment with no time limit. Suddenly we could have an hour to work with someone on housing, mental health, wound care, HIV care, whatever it may be. And we're really seeing that in the overdose prevention centers, that they are, because all of the anxiety and the stress around drug consumption is gone, the readiness to engage in further care has increased significantly. And both of our overdose prevention centers are co-located within our larger program. And for us, that's a very important and very critical piece. The Washington Heights site, as I said, is our consumer-led site. It's the cheaper of the two models. It's also a little bit more nimble from a regulatory perspective, meaning we're not dealing with clinician licensing issues, given that we don't have federal or state permission to operate. In our program, the Washington Heights folks are quite young. The average age is 26. They are a high volume heroin and cocaine speedball population, mostly encampment dwelling or otherwise unhoused, and they represent the majority of the overdose occurrences in our program, despite fewer registered users, and we'll touch on that in a second. This is what it looks like. You can see very simple table chair setup, nice, clean, bright. You can see the overdose intervention carts there and a little bit of a close-up in terms of what supplies are located in there that allows us to intervene so effectively. But it's a very simple setup. Don't have time to watch the video, so we're just gonna skip on through. The East Harlem site is our more traditional medical model. That means it's a higher threshold of staff. It's also the more widely known design build, big stainless steel booths, the big mirrors, etc. We have registered nurses and care coordinators working on that team. It's an older population, many veterans on that team. It's a very high volume inhalation population, smoking. So lots of smoking, heroin, crack, fentanyl, K2, meth, you name it. Mixed in terms of housing status, some are housed, sheltered dwelling, or homeless, and it has a much lower overdose occurrence rate compared to the Washington Heights program, despite a very much significantly higher registered users. And this is predominantly because of the mode of administration. Smoking is less risky than injection from an overdose standpoint. And this is what the East Harlem site looks like. You can see in the back there, you can see the smoking room in the back. It's got 8 booths, a smoking room that it can accommodate 4 to 6 smokers at a time, and an individual smoking vestibule for anyone who's experiencing a mental health crisis, an overamp, or just really needs some privacy. And here's the smoking room a little more in depth there. It's got a very specialized ventilation system, a double airlock door entry system, and an intercom to keep all of the vapor and the particulate matter in the smoking room. Don't have any time to watch the video. I'm so sorry. We gotta fly. We gotta go. Since launching basically on December 1st, we have over 1,500 registered users, and the sites have been used, as you can see, just under 30,000 times. I want you to notice that there are over 1,000 people registered to Harlem and just over 400 registered to Washington Heights, and a lower utilization rate for Washington Heights. But look at the overdose occurrence rate. 400 overdose interventions, 250 of them are in Washington Heights, amongst that very young injection population who is utilizing the site less frequently. On the left here, this is a real overdose intervention. This photo is used with permission, but you can see the team with the ambu bag, the naloxone's out. It's a very skilled and coordinated response. I will say, of the 400 overdoses we've intervened in so far, we've only had to call the ambulance 5 times. That's due to the extremely high training level of the staff, for one. That's also due to the fact that our team is there the second the medical emergency or overdose begins. The real tragedy of that 109,000 lost lives to overdose last year is that an overdose is 100% reversible if somebody is there when it happens. And certainly just in our few short months of operation, you can see that here. Massive cost savings to emergency services, police, and the hospitals, that we have taken this piece of work completely off their plates, and they're grateful to us for it. We have diverted over 600,000 units of hazardous waste from parks and public spaces in New York City. I cannot tell you how huge a pile of hazardous waste that is, but believe me, it is not insignificant. It's really quite impressive. Early impacts, and then I'll be quiet. It's very early days. We're just 7-8 months in. But 80% of the OPC participants have been connected into other care via the overdose prevention centers. That's huge. This population was previously very resistant to any conversation about further service, and it's allowing them to consume drugs in this environment with our staff that has increased their readiness to have those conversations. Overdose occurrence rates, which were very high when we launched, have now plateaued and are starting to decrease, which means that safety education around maintenance, use, and safer use is really hitting home. And then I just include this last little thing on the bottom of this page, because I just think that this really drives the point home. On our current staff today, 8 months after opening the overdose prevention centers, we have hired 3 people who were overdose prevention center participants who overdosed with us, survived, stabilized, and have now joined our team at entry-level positions. Very early days, who knows what happens with those hires, but the fact remains, this is a program that connects people with no opportunities in life to opportunities and keeps them alive. How did we do it? I think I'll pause here and pass it over to Anna Jane, because I know we want to make sure that we get enough time to talk about how they got the law passed, and then we can circle back to how New York squeaked this through without a law. But with this, I'll hand it over to the wonderful Anna Jane to fill you in on her part of the story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gillian. I was taking a lot of notes and just thinking about how, last Friday, I work at a harm reduction organization, and we had someone who came into our center. We don't currently offer supervised consumption. We had someone who came into our center, left, used their substance, overdosed on the sidewalk. It took someone who who was walking by to run in, yell, get the Narcan, everyone to go, call 911, and just how that all could have been avoided, all that stress, all that trauma, all those emergency services. So thank you, Kaylin. So Rhode Island took a different approach. So in Rhode Island, last year, a law was signed that was the first law in the country that authorized the use of safe consumption services. So we call these harm reduction centers. So I will be using that term. I know there are a lot of different terms going on, but that is the term in our law. And so I'm going to use that. And that term was chosen intentionally to really highlight that, yes, these are places where people can consume pre-obtained substances, but more importantly, these were comprehensive places where people could access many different services, many of the services Kaylin mentioned around medical care, education, HIV and hepatitis C services, clean supplies, basic needs, food, water, clothing, just so many different services under one roof. And so yes, supervised consumption, but more importantly, a holistic approach, which is again why they're called harm reduction centers. So the law getting passed was an interesting journey. It was introduced over the course of 3 different years. So it was introduced 3 times before it was actually passed and signed into law. And what the law does is it authorizes the use of supervised consumption, which is very important because the federal law is not crystal clear. And also in our state law, we had a state level provision of the quote unquote crack house statute that prevents the supervised consumption or authorizing a place where drugs are consumed knowingly. So that basically undid our state level law and also provided that state level protection. The law also provided state level liability protections for people who use a facility, for people who operate a facility, which provides some immunity for people who are actually doing this in good faith. The law also it told the Department of Health that they need to create a regulatory infrastructure for creating a harm reduction center. So for actually having regulations and licensing the harm reduction centers. So harm reduction centers in Rhode Island, they're very regulated. And that was intentional because we felt like that would be a much easier pitch, and also that people who use these facilities deserve to be in places that are up to a high quality. I'll get more into the regulations later because I think with the regulations, there's always a tension between making sure that standards are met, but also that the standards aren't so high that people can't actually implement them. And the last thing the law did is it is a 2-year pilot. So that pilot, the law does sunset in March of 2024. And it also required city or town council approval to actually open a harm reduction center. So the city or town council will need to approve the very specific location of that. And that was something that was put in at the last minute to get the law passed. So in 2021, our governor signed that bill into law. And then since then, the Department of Health worked to create those regulations that I mentioned. They did a very thoughtful job about trying to balance having a regulatory infrastructure without it being over-regulated to the point where it was unattainable. We can think of other instances where medical services are over-regulated so that people cannot access them. And as part of those regulations, they had things like making sure the hallways were wide enough for a stretcher, also ensuring that safer smoking is a requirement of a harm reduction center. And this is something that was really advocated for by my colleague, who is a former crack cocaine smoker, who wanted to make it very clear that he and others like him need to be welcomed in these facilities, and that this is not only an issue of access, but this is a racial justice issue. So now any facility that were to get licensed in Rhode Island needs to have safer smoking. So those regulations were promulgated about 6 months ago. And now we are working to actually open a harm reduction center. So we have not actually opened one, unlike New York, but we are honing in on a specific location in the city of Providence. And just last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, time is really flying at this point. Our state allocated over $2 million of our opioid settlement funding specifically for a harm reduction center, which we're hoping to use to purchase a building, which we would not have otherwise had access to that type of funding, especially given the federal challenges and constraints of accessing funding for harm reduction center. So we're really excited that the state actively agreed to allocate that funding. That funding is not to go to one organization, but any organization can apply for it. So that's where we're at now. And so we have a specific location in mind. We're starting stakeholder engagement around that location. It's a really fun time because it's right before a primary, and because we will need city council approval, we're trying to really engage city council candidates as well as current city council members so that we can hit the ground running after the election, which is in mid-September. And the city of Providence has been super, super supportive of these efforts. So the city of Providence, our mayor, who is term limited, so he's about to leave office at the end of the year. He came out and testified at the State House saying how important these efforts were. We also have we don't have like a city level health department because Rhode Island's really small, so everything's at the state level. But the sort of like what's health component of our city, our health office, I guess. They're not really a department, but they coordinate health stuff. They've been super supportive, and the city has convened an internal working group to think through some of the logistics of a harm reduction center, things like what will zoning look like, making sure that law enforcement has say on what their response will be, making sure that EMS has say in terms of, what the location or whatever, their needs or whatever the case may be. City council has say in terms of what authorization of a location looks like, if it's a resolution or if it's an ordinance, things like that. So the city has been super, super supportive in terms of actively thinking through their role at the municipal level to approve this now that we do have the state law. And just sort of, I heard that New Mexico is interested in also pursuing a state level law. So I just wanted to talk about some like lessons learned and things that were really successful in terms of us getting the law passed. I think one thing that was helpful was that we had people at the State House every single day talking to lawmakers. And a lot of people really connected with lawmakers around this as a personal topic. Many lawmakers have friends and family members or are personally impacted themselves by overdose. And so being able to connect and really talk about how these are evidence-based solutions. And at that time, there were none in the United States, but we could talk about the evidence from Canada, or we could talk about the evidence from places in Europe, and that we were in a crisis and this is something that really needed to happen. And we were able to get some stakeholders along the way, like the head of our health committee, who is an EMT in a town that's very much impacted by overdose. He was not initially bought into this, but he really wanted to do something because he responded to overdoses every single week. And so through more conversations, we were able to show him that this was a really important way to prevent overdose and also to engage folks who are using drugs. So we were able to connect with lawmakers. We also had a pretty unified voice. We have a strong both harm reduction and recovery community in Rhode Island. And people really banded together to say, this is what we want, and to advocate together. And then our Department of Health also really supported us from, so oftentimes behind the scenes to really push this forward as well. So that was also really helpful in terms of getting it passed. So it's really just a lot of pushing, a lot of conversations, and a lot of open-mindedness to engage in really like open-ended on sort of conversations. We also we're really grateful to have researchers at places like Brown and whatnot who are leading experts in this topic. And so being able to say, we have experts right here down the road, who can answer any questions, who can sit with people, and those researchers being gracious enough to do so was also really helpful. So now that our laws passed and we have regulations, we're working on opening, and definitely really grateful for the work that folks in Canada and folks in New York like Kaylin have been doing to help us think through some of the operations of this as we move forward. So thank you, and happy to talk further, answer any questions.
Thanks, Anna Jane. And Kaylin, do you want to finish up because we do have some time.
Sure, I'll
Okay.
pop back. It's sort of like a now for something completely different moment. It's just we as in the entire community in New York that had been advocating for this had tried at a state level a couple different times, and it just was fairly obvious it wasn't going to shake out for us that way. So I'll just share my screen again. We'll pop back to this. So we went a different route. We had a very unique political window, and it was very finite, very short, and we snuck through it. This is pretty common in the safe consumption story in other parts of the world. It doesn't always happen this way, but you can definitely find 5 or 6 examples where this was a key moment. Usually a transition of power. That was certainly true in New York. So we had, Governor Cuomo at the time sort of over here being, held accountable for being a little handsy, and the entire state kind of in a hubbub over what Cuomo was doing. So no one was looking at us. And then we had Mayor de Blasio, an outgoing mayor who was feeling a little bit and being criticized for being a lame duck mayor. So mishandling of Black Lives Matter, mishandling of so many things. 2 months left in office, really wanted a legacy and felt like he could throw his weight behind this as he was on his way out the door. And we made the most of that moment. So that's exactly what we did. We knew, I'm just going to be very, very transparent. Were we sort of being used by the de Blasio administration to give an outgoing mayor a legacy? Absolutely. But did we allow it to happen on our terms to get these 2 centers open? Yes, we did. So I want to be very, very clear. We have incredible support from the city and state health department, particularly the city health department, and in City Hall, even post de Blasio, now that Adams is in office, we also have continued support from City Hall. Want to be very clear, though, that technically all we had in terms of formal protections was a letter, a rather mealy-mouthed letter, if I can be honest, but a letter from a mayor who was in office for 2 months and is now gone. So we are effectively sort of in the breeze with no federal, state, and no official city protection. We knew that this was going to be a possibility for us because we knew de Blasio was on his way out. We knew Hochul was likely going to be taking the helm at a state level. And we knew because Hochul has personal experience in her family with loss from the opioid epidemic, we thought she'd be soft on the issue. We did a lot of work with Adams before he took office to see if he was going to come after us. Was he not going to come after us? Was he neutral? Was he going to be pro? And we felt fairly confident that he would let us rock once the sites were open. Although it's been very important for us to control the public narrative, to not sort of push him into a corner and sort of to force him to speak on the overdose prevention centers before he was ready to do so himself. And that's one of the reasons why we've done so much media. We need to keep the story. We need to make sure that our successes are widely known. This softens the grounds for the feds, softens the grounds at a state level, and certainly keeps the mayor in a nice sweet spot. We did a risk analysis at a local, state, and federal level. And what that means was looking at the 2 precedents we had at the time, which was Philadelphia and Rhode Island. We knew Philadelphia didn't have sites built, they didn't have staff trained, they hadn't written policies and procedures, and under Trump, they were, they received a very nasty cease and desist letter, which still gave them 6 months to demonstrate that they were no longer mobilizing to open an overdose prevention center. And we all know the Safe House case is still pending. And then Rhode Island, you guys got a couple visits from the feds, did you not? Like a little bit of, it wasn't you guys? No, we knew that you guys didn't get visits from the feds. We knew that Rhode Island had this law passed, no site identified, right? No staff hired expressly for the purpose of overdose prevention centers. And yet we're not really, there was no real interference, right, from the federal level. So we looked at those 2 precedents as favorable for us from the federal perspective. We also looked at who was in power now, who was on their way out, who was on their way in, to just sort of read the tea leaves a little bit on what was going to happen after we opened the doors. The last thing we did, which I think was one of the smarter things that we did, was we leaked our policies and procedures and photos of the sites as they were being built at a fairly high level within DOJ, not too high, but just high enough that you know it's going to get taken up the chain. And same with the ONDCP, not too high, but just high enough. So we really gave them everything they needed to sort of come out of the shadows and let us know what they thought. And we heard absolutely nothing. We had a long and short-term community engagement strategy. The long-term strategy was really centered around the fact that we'd been operating an unsanctioned program at both our locations for 6 years. This was really pivotal because it helped address head-on any sort of perception of NIMBY. No new programs and not in my backyard. We were long-standing existing programs in both of our neighborhoods who had formalized an existing program. It wasn't new. This was the number one sort of strategy for countering any sort of NIMBY sentiments that cropped up. Over the course of our 6 years operating the unsanctioned programs, we invited key stakeholders in to see what we were doing at very strategic moments. So we sort of allowed people behind the curtain. This included law enforcement, elected officials, principals from the area schools, family members who had people using and overdosing in their stairwells of their buildings. Anytime there was a negative media story about the drug crisis in New York City, the overdose epidemic, we would say, why don't you come and see what we're doing? We think this could be a part of the solution. This sort of strategic revealing of our cards really allowed us to reframe the issue of safer consumption with community members in both of our neighborhoods, one at a time, really playing to the issues that were closest to their hearts personally. And the last thing was, and God bless you, Rhode Island, we needed a little bit of federal protection. And how do you get that? You do a federal research study. We didn't have any time to get NIDA on board as an evaluator because from the minute we decided to open the sites to the day they opened was 6 weeks. That included building 2 consumption sites, training all the staff, buying all the gear, getting it all set up. So we are forever indebted to our friends in Rhode Island who allowed us to be sort of an add-on to their NIDA evaluation. And now we are technically a part of a federal evaluation of safer consumption, then that gives us a modicum of protection at a federal level. So forever indebted to you guys always for that. Separate from that, NYU and the New York City Department of Health are also evaluating the operations. But that's a little bit just very quickly on how we managed to sneak through. And since that time, since we launched 8 months ago, the Safe House ruling has been delayed a couple times, and we talk very regularly with the Safe House team, and they're in agreement that the delay in the ruling now is in part to the fact that New York has sites open. There's this reassessment of what the ruling is going to be because the old ruling is sort of like, it's obsolete. So the legal team has had to step back and rethink how they're going to rule on this case now that there are sites operational in the US. So it's all very favorable. The federal climate in particular, we're seeing lots of signaling that things are going in a very positive direction. You know, it's just a great time for New Mexico to be having this conversation. And I think the thing that probably Anna Jane and I would love you to take away from this is you have options. There are multiple paths emerging to get these life-saving services up and running in your jurisdiction if you decide to do that. And I think I speak for Anna Jane as well. We're obviously here to help in any way we can through that process.
Kaylin, Anna Jane, thank you so much. It's amazing. I think you gave us such a good picture of both what happens day to day on the ground and sort of the political climate and some of sort of the implementation issues we have to think about. So we're really honored you joined us and really thankful that you two are paving this path forward for the rest of us and that really it's about saving lives and connecting people to services. And so all that other stuff is great, like the syringe litter that gets picked up, and not having public drug use, but really it's about the people that are utilizing these services. So thank you so much. We would love to open it up for questions. I don't know, Councilor Rivera, Councilor Beria, how you want to do this, but I'll hand it back over to the two of you.
Thanks. We'll just take questions as they come up. I think Bruce was the first one to raise his hand. So Bruce, you have the floor. You just need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Awesome presentation, both. Thank you very much. So very informative. I have a quick question though. As far as safety of the drug use in the facilities, as far as drugs that are cut, is there any testing done to make sure that the drugs they're consuming has been cut with like a poison or something that would kill them? Just curious.
Yes. So we use two different modalities. We have a mass spectrometer, and we're seeing something very troubling, which I'll talk about in a quick second. We also use 5 different testing strips. So everybody knows about the fentanyl testing strips, right? Pretty old news at this point. We also use benzodiazepine testing strips, morphine testing strips, because morphine is the closest molecular compound to heroin. So that's essentially, is there heroin in the heroin is the question we're asking there. Cocaine testing strips, ketamine testing strips, and methamphetamine testing strips. We are really curious in the prevalence of plant-based drugs in the current drug supply, namely heroin and cocaine. The theory is they've been predominantly replaced, of course, by fentanyl and methamphetamine. And we really need to have a handle on that. We're also concerned about other adulterants, xylazine, levamisole, borax, I mentioned, all of the cutting agents. But one of the reasons our site has been so successful, and any overdose prevention center is going to be so successful, is we're always ahead of the game in terms of what's in the drug supply and what will physically manifest in the body when people ingest it. So overdose response will have to change if xylazine or carfentanil enters the drug supply in a significant way, because those drugs, one is a paralytic and one, of course, is just like an off the charts opiate. The mass spectrometer, switching gears a little bit, we had 5 DOAs in Marcus Garvey Park, which is a stone's throw from our East Harlem location, all during the hours when we were not open. We're working to get both programs to 24-hour operations, and the city is backing us to do that, but that is a huge lift for a small organization. We're not just talking about one building, we're talking about 2. Getting 2 programs to 24-hour operations is a lot of work. We're getting there, but it's slow. These people died when we weren't open. We responded by expanding our hours the following day. We pulled a bunch of samples out of Marcus Garvey Park, picked up drug baggies, crack vials, went to the dealers that we know. We also pulled any sample from the Overdose Prevention Center where people dropped really immediately and really seriously. We ran those through the mass spectrometer. And what we're seeing in New York City are fentanyl purity levels between 13 and 15%. This is the highest New York City has ever seen. It is easily high enough to have killed many, many people. The concentration of fentanyl in the drug supply in New York City is usually between 3 and 9%, to give you an idea of how significant a jump that is. So yes, testing. The problem is, testing is really only half of it. If you're not using it in front of somebody, it kind of doesn't matter. So what, what's in it. If you are sick and you don't have any other choices, treatment in this country is so terrible, you're going to have to use those drugs. It's just really important that somebody be there.
One more question. I didn't see it in the bullet points. It was there. I apologize. How do you regulate time in the centers? Is there any time limitation?
Yeah, great question. There's not. However, this is where the training of the staff is really, really key. You have to manage flow in those rooms very, very carefully. We staff at a 4-to-1 ratio. That means 4 participants to 1 staff, plus a position that we call the RPIC, which is the responsible person in charge. If you have an overdose, maybe you have 2 or 3 people triaging that overdose, your ratio is immediately impacted. If you have more than 1 overdose at once, which is common, if the drug supply, there's a particular batch on the street, which is really adulterated, we call those dominoes in the OPC, your ratio really takes a hit. If you're not dealing with that, you just have a full house and you have a lineup outside, you've got a flaw in your service, right? Because the point is to not have anyone who is dope sick wait for access to the site, because they won't wait. We know this. They're going to leave and go use outside. So managing flow is really key. That means there are certain behaviors that are permitted in the OPC and there are certain behaviors that aren't. It's really about drug consumption. So you can't unpack your bag, you can't do your hair, you can't call your mom, you can't do that kind of stuff. You really do have to focus on your dose as defined by you. That doesn't mean 1 injection. If you're doing a speedball and that's going to be 3 injections and a trip to the smoking room, that's okay. But once you're done that dose, you got to go so somebody else can come in. So it really requires incredible relationship building from the staff to the participants, incredible management of the room and the flow of the room to manage the wait times and get people through safely. It's also a design element. If you don't design your site big enough to accommodate the needs of your particular population where you are, in some ways you've lost before you started. Build it to be big enough and allow for growth.
I like the Monty Python reference too. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah. Got to keep it interesting.
Anna Jane, did you want a chance to respond to any of Bruce's questions?
I mean, I think it's less relevant because we're not open, although these are really, as we're opening, these are really important, considerations for us to be taking into effect. So we do.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, Anna Jane, before you go, because I know you've got a site kind of in your sites. The real hero of this story is the landlords, and it will be for Anna Jane too. These are very special people who really stick their necks out and take a big risk. Our landlords in Harlem, he's a Hasidic Jew. So certainly somebody who understands oppression and suffering. And our landlord in Washington Heights is a Cuban refugee who got his family here on a boat, on a dinghy, somebody who understands oppression. We have 30-year leasehold condo agreements in both of our buildings, which means we are not going anywhere. And we have landlords who are fully aware of what we're doing and have our backs completely. And that will be very, very important for Anna Jane. And that'll be very important for you as well. So if you are at the stage where you have a landlord or a possible building, just know that our landlords are very open to speaking to their kin in other parts of the world. They've been getting lots of phone calls from Philly and lots of phone calls from Los Angeles as other jurisdictions are making moves to get these up and running. But it is possible, even with the crack house statute looming, there are people who will say, yes, you can do this in my building with my blessing. So don't give up, they're out there.
Thank you. Any other questions, Bruce, or was that it? Okay, anyone else? Gina.
I can't hear you.
So, yeah, I was trying to find my cursor. Sorry. To both you, Caitlin, and Anna Jane, and I want to say to the overall group, these presentations just every meeting knock my socks off, and they blow me backwards as to what's available, and I get lost up in my head about how we progress towards getting those types of services in Santa Fe. And so I have two, I tend to ask some funding questions typically in these presentations. But just on one of your answers, Caitlin, you talked about the importance of the flow in the in and out. And I realize there's a difference with urban settings and more rural settings. We tend to be a little bit more rural and spread out comparatively. Are there models that have an area, or there are plans to develop an area after dosing that people aren't necessarily flowing out of the building, but flowing into an area that they're safe, they're comfortable, but at the same time aren't posing a danger to themselves or others if they're exiting out into the general public?
Yeah, great question. There are lots of criticisms of safer consumption by the detractors. They create drug users, they, decrease public safety, all that stuff. That's mostly all been disproven by the evidence.
Right.
There is one criticism of safer consumption sites that I actually think is true, and it's exactly what you're talking about. We all sort of wave our hands around and get on our soapbox and say, in 36 years, with 130 safer consumption sites operating all around the world, no one has ever died from an overdose in a safer consumption site. True, but what the criticism is, yeah, you say that, but you discharge them because you're so concerned with your numbers, how many people we saw, they leave the site, the naloxone wears off and they die outside. And when a program has not really thought through very intentionally and carefully exactly what you're talking about, that can be a risk, right? Discharging too soon, and where are we discharging to? So I'm a huge proponent of co-location. When I discharge from the OPC, I'm transferring care, if I need to, within our program, not onto the street. And I'm hopefully building a dynamic enough program that the person I'm working with is not going to want to leave and go back outside where they're visibly under the influence, at risk of arrest, or where a drug-involved medical emergency could return. So our program, I wish we were in it right now so I could show you. I should say open invitation to all of you to come and see it, because it's very helpful to see it, to sort of conceptualize some of what we're talking about. But we have food, a huge lounge with a TV on, and it feels like a living room. We have highly trained staff in every part of the building. We have a respite room with hot water bottles and heating pads and aromatherapy and blackout curtains and a big moon on the wall. So if you want to sleep, you don't have to do that on the sidewalk in Harlem. I'm going to put you to bed somewhere safe, and I've got pulse oximeters and oxygen. It's literally the only space in the country where an active drug user can sleep, because they're not welcome in the shelter system. They're not housable. So that's who you're seeing in the parks and the subways, or in your, in your rural municipalities. It's the same, different setting, but same principle. We have acupuncture, massage, job training, groups, a garden, a band, medical services, ketamine therapy, like you name it. We've tried to co-locate it on site, laundry, showers, etc., so that the OPC is one small part of a much larger program meeting a very diverse set of needs. So if we discharge you, like green stamp, you're good, you can go. Those are you can get out of here. Go do what you want to do, go to work, go pick your kids up for school or whatever you need to do. If that's not the case, we are transferring care to someone else within our program and doing our best to hold you for as long as we possibly can. Does that make sense?
It does. And thank you for giving the picture of the additional pieces.
Yeah. You're welcome.
With all of that in mind, and forgive me if you covered part of this, but as it relates to funding, and I know the budget of Santa Fe will be dramatically smaller than a budget needed in New York or New York City or Rhode Island. But broadly, what are the budgets? And if it were a pie, what are your funding sources?
Great question. Because we do not have federal or state approval, no city or state dollars, and because we're not Rhode Island, no city or state dollars can be used to fund the overdose prevention centers. So as it stands now, they're being funded by foundation money, private donations, and our discretionary funds. This is obviously not a sustainable funding pot. Going back to sort of the frantic 6-week launch period, the City Hall and the health department really tried to fund our overdose prevention centers. They just couldn't quite get their heads legally clear to do it. But they have every intention of coming on as a sustainable funder as soon as they possibly can. They're working on it as we speak. But for now, no city and state money can be used to fund the overdose prevention centers. Everything else, the vast majority of everything else, is city and state dollars. There are some exceptions. We do have some foundation money that supports little odds and ends here and there, but it's really fairly insignificant compared to the way the city and the state health departments have come to the table. What does that look like for us? It's in the millions. It's in the millions. Remember that we are working towards expanding to 24-hour operations. I will say our 2 overdose prevention centers, and again, you pointed this out, you're totally right. Oh, here she comes. You guys knew, Emily knew she might be joining us. Here she is. This is Johnny, everybody. This is my daughter. To run both of our overdose prevention centers right now, which is the 2-shift model, so 7 in the morning until 11:30 at night, is close to $4 million a year. But they're busy. Harlem is seeing several hundred visits a day. I do a lot of technical assistance. I'm working with Nevada right now, another very rural setting outside of Reno and Las Vegas, who is really grappling with how do we do this? How do we do safer consumption when so many of our folks are in this rural setting? And we're looking at a hub and spoke model for them, a combination of fixed site, small fixed site, mobile and virtual. And we can, if you want help thinking through something like that and costing it out, I'm happy to help with that too. Because I think it's a little bit comparing apples and oranges, right? Like when we open our doors in the morning, we got a crowd outside. People don't want to die. We're in very high need neighborhoods in the middle of a crisis. That's not going to happen for you. It's going to be a little bit different where you are. We'll have to think through a different style of intervention. Same concept, just different style.
Okay, thank you for your transparency on that. And by the way, a surprisingly low
But that's
number.
Just staff, only personnel. That's not rent, that's not equipment, that's just personnel.
Okay, but still, for what you provide,
Yeah.
I'm pleasantly surprised.
Ooh, I don't want to misrepresent myself. That's only in the overdose prevention center. That's not everything else.
Okay.
It suddenly starts to seem a little less cheap.
Okay.
I just don't want to give you false hope.
Sure. In Anna Jean, are you comfortable sharing what your plans are and your budgeting plans are?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we passed the law, we made it very clear with lawmakers that state funding would not be used for the overdose or for the harm reduction center. Like Caitlin was saying, a lot of our other services that we plan on providing, HIV testing, our syringe services, those are all currently funded by our Department of Health. We have outreach services where we would spread the word about these things. Like, we are not going to reinvent the funding wheel for the services that we already offer that are already authorized by the state. But we're definitely on the earlier part of our venture around funding, recognizing that for the safer consumption pieces, we will need to have specifically non-federal or state funding. In Rhode Island, all of our state funding is federal funding anyways, because it's all just federal pass-through. So we're basically trying to avoid any state dollars as well. But I mentioned it briefly, we have this window of opportunity now where we are getting $20 million a year from a mixture of pharmaceutical company settlements. It's going to be the first of a 19-year payout So it'll be about $20 million every year, and that's just at the state level. The state is getting 80% of it to distribute, but cities and towns are also getting 20% of it. So because Providence is the largest city, they'll be getting a large chunk of that as well. And that is funding that is a lot more flexible to be used. So we were able to receive $2.25 million, which we plan to use for the initial a down payment. We're looking at purchasing a building because we have not had a successful landlords, generous landlords as Kaylin has been able to find in New York. So we're looking at purchasing a building, which the real estate market is just like totally wild right now. Horrible time to be purchasing a building, especially when you have all the neighborhood considerations, all the bus accessibility, all the zoning, like don't recommend it. So we're going to use part of that funding for the down payment purchase, and then part of that funding for the initial build out, safer smoking areas, just all the initial stuff we'll need in addition to initial staffing as well. So we're planning, so we have that cushion, which is really great, and then supplement that with the state funding we have for our current services. And then also we do have some generous donors, which is really helpful. And then we have researchers who are being very open-minded about how to think about research funding. So they have research funding, and yes, it is going to be used for research, but there are ways that it can also overlap with operational needs, which is really helpful to leverage that is federal funding and some private sort of foundational funding specifically for research, so that we can really try to optimize our options currently.
Thank you, Angie, and thank you, Caitlin. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Gino. Anyone else have any questions? Anybody at all?
Me. Thank you both.
I have a quick question. Sorry, Counselor. Just for Anna Jane, I mean, you're sort of starting the idea of purchasing a building, starting from scratch. And are you planning, because it seems like a lot of the extra cost comes along with all of those other wraparound services and all of the other things that Kaylin mentioned, right? That really take up the vast majority and that lend to, it seems, the success of the whole operation. Are you planning on including all of that in your initial building?
Yeah, absolutely. So we
do you have the extra funding to be able to, because how much of it is because of all of those other things that you all provide in conjunction with the center? And so, because we would here in Santa Fe probably be doing it from scratch like you in Rhode Island.
Yeah, so we're well positioned because we currently operate several drop-in centers already, many of which are very bustling and basically have all the services, not the blackout room with the moon. That's one I have to think more about. But a lot of the services already and are already highly utilized. We have peer staff who have many of them are former clients themselves, who really have really strong relationships with the folks we serve. So we are building from that base. We also have like a outreach worker who is based at district court, who provides court support. We have a mobile unit that is in our downtown area, which is like our bus hub. And because Rhode Island is tiny, it serves people from across the state. So we're starting with that foundation, and we've been rapidly expanding over the past few years. So starting a new site is something that is more familiar to us, even though we don't have this specific, the supervised consumption service. We have many of the other services already. And I'm pretty excited because of one of like our sort of main contender for a building. It has a top floor that it sort of has like it's like a U-shaped, and there's sort of like mirror images of each other. So people could go on one side for one set of services, on another side for another set of services. And then it has a downstairs facility that used to be an urgent care. So it really has a lot of room to offer a lot of services. I should have also mentioned much earlier that we are planning to partner with a medical provider who can provide things like Suboxone prescriptions, clinical care, services that we don't currently offer in-house because we're not a clinical organization. We're a peer-based harm reduction organization, but we felt like co-locating those things and partnering with an organization where that is really their specialty and they have similar values to us in terms of, yes, they provide treatment, but they're much more harm reduction oriented than many treatment providers are, can help offer a wider range of services so that we can really provide more services under one roof.
I want to add one thing to that. You just reminded me. Yes. Your provider is so key. Who you choose to be your operator is going to be one of the biggest and most important decisions that you make. And I think this is something that Anna Jane and her team have done really, really well. These are experienced providers, very enmeshed in the community already, very literate in sort of harm reduction philosophy and technique. And it's something that some of the other jurisdictions are really struggling with, that tension between like, should the health department be the operator, or should a harm reduction agency be the operator? Should a clinical team be the operator? There are pros and cons to each. And you know, we can discuss those more, but that's a question you're going to have to grapple with. Johnny clearly has big thoughts on that.
And then
yeah.
And I just have another question for you, just in relation to law enforcement. And it sounds like you haven't had any issues with law enforcement in any of these operations, but are there any that you were anticipating? Do you have an acuerdo? Do you have like an agreement with law enforcement? And is that something that was of concern, or how has it played out?
Yeah, so I know Anna Jane's gonna have an answer for this too, because two different worlds, right? Rhode Island and New York City after the summer we just had and COVID and Black Lives Matter. We were stressing the NYPD, like, believe me, it's the NYPD. We were like, what can we reasonably assume we're going to get from the NYPD, and at what level, how high? For a couple of different reasons. One, it's one thing to get assurances from the brass, but when your rank and file officers are beating people up and arresting people and stationed outside your site, you're not going to be successful. So I think we approached the NYPD with sort of the blinders off, and we didn't require them to put anything in writing, because we knew if we forced that, we wouldn't get anything. And really, without federal permission, without the state backing, and to be very honest, because I think it's important to be honest and transparent around these conversations, the NYPD had no respect for the de Blasio administration. So yes, they would do what he said because the mayor controls the police. They were definitely not going to stick their necks out any further than they absolutely had to. So we needed, Sam and I, my executive director and I, we needed to figure out how comfortable could we be as the provider taking all of the risk. To be clear, we assumed all of the risk. The feds aren't going to go after the health department. The health department's just going to say, listen, I don't know. We, the provider, took all the risk. We had to really think, how comfortable would we be opening if we had back channel conversations with NYPD officers fairly high up, who said they would not prosecute and they would not fish the sites for warrants, etc. I want to tell you that we were pleasantly surprised by how those conversations went, and have been absolutely blown away by the level of partnership and commitment we've received from the NYPD since we opened. It blew me away. After the initial sort of shock that we approached them with this question, it was really, what do you see our role as being? How do you want us to interact with the site? How do you want us to be in the area? And from us, it was, you need to continue to do your jobs. You have to continue to, address public safety. We're in a very urban environment. There's residential buildings. There's a daycare across the street from our Harlem site. There's huge apartment buildings all around our Washington Heights site. There's a playground across the street from our Washington Heights site. It's New York City. What we said is, we just don't want you to impede the success of the sites. And if people are scared to go, they won't work. And if they don't work, we will not successfully take this piece of work off your plate. And that's what we're trying to do. And they said, great. We went to roll calls, everyone, 7, 3, and midnight, to all of them. Open invitation for the officers to come, fully expecting none of them to come, and they all came. And they stood in those OPCs, many of them with their jaws on the floor, and they were so uncomfortable, and you could just see the wheels turning, being like, what in the sweet holy hell is this? but really trying to wrap their heads around it. And to their credit, they came, and they've been an incredible partner ever since. The other thing I said to them is, I'm not going to call you unless I need you, but if we do call, we need you. So really letting them know that we weren't shutting them out, but we were trying to clean up our side of the street in terms of the larger community safety issues and just sort of like quality of life issues we were trying to address in the neighborhood. We're now in a position where we text regularly, where the NYPD is coming to us for our spectrometer data. They want to know what we're seeing in terms of overdose trends. They're saying, God, we're seeing a spike in overdoses in the community. What are you guys seeing? How can we help? We collected some samples for you from this park. Do you mind testing them for us? Because we're faster than the NYPD lab. It's a true partnership. We're working with law enforcement in other parts of the country. We get in the backwaters that these conversations are going to be incremental and slow. But we would never have believed that we would be able to get the NYPD where they currently are in Harlem and Washington Heights. Yeah, so it's possible.
Any other questions, Marcella?
No, I don't know if Anna Jane has any insight in how you're approaching law enforcement at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Kaylin was saying, we know that our sites won't work if there's law enforcement outside, even if they are just parked outside, even if they're parked outside in an undercover car, not in uniform. And we have had some challenges with another location of ours where police were driving by very frequently. They said, we're just doing our job, and our clients were freaked out and, stopped coming. And so we realized that this is really important for us to think through thoughtfully and understand that we feel like we need to engage them in very real ways so that no one feels blindsided, so that we can have open lines of communication, and so that we can realize we're over here doing this, you all are over here doing this, and we'll connect when we need to, but not when we don't. And so I'm very grateful that the city of Providence, which is the city where our first site is most likely going to be, just because of size and density and municipal buy-in, is that they have put together this working group that has different departments thinking about what will a harm reduction center look like when it's open. And with that, the police were invited to a seat at the table. They have been part of the process. We presented about the specific location, they were there. And so I think just making sure that they've been included as any other municipal department, as EMS has been, as the zoning department has been, so that we can continue that conversation has been really important. And then I think as we get further into opening, what exactly that conversation will look like will change. I think, obviously, again, the people at the top can say one thing, the people on the ground can say different things. And so we realized that it's not just getting the okay of someone at the top. I will also say I was quite nervous when we were doing legislative advocacy around this issue that our police union would be very opposed to it. We were working on another piece of legislation that reclassified drug possession from a felony to a misdemeanor, and our police chiefs association just really came out in full force against it. They really hated it. They said, it's taking their tools from the toolbox, all the things. And so with that experience, although we were able to get that law passed, I was nervous that they would come out of the woodwork for this too. And they didn't. I just don't think they care. I mean, I think they really saw it as a separate world. And so I was really grateful for that. And it was a bit of a bellwether to understand sort of what their approach would be as we get further towards implementation.
And they don't want to be prosecuting low-level addicted people. They just don't. And the overdose prevention centers are a great remedy to that.
Anything else, Marcella? Let me open the door for Chris, he's locked out. I have a few questions though. I don't know if anyone else had questions, but it was really just around like I have a lot of questions, but I think just as a city councilor, trying to understand, it sounds like no cities are examples of these centers, no cities are running it. And I guess I'm trying to understand when the city is actually involved. Is it related to the like zoning aspect of it? Or the funding aspect? You did say that there was, in some cases, it wasn't funded right now by the city, but potentially could be. So I guess I'm just wondering, like, what is the role of a city in the examples, not just the ones you know of, but the ones you've seen elsewhere too?
The city, so the city hall and then the city health department. In our context, and I want to be really careful here because one is not better than the other. They're just different. And we have, you know, in the US, we have all these little political microcosms, right? So in each jurisdiction, we're going to figure out a unique path to the goal. And this was just the path that worked for New York. Rhode Island's is very different. Philly's will be very different. LA is going to be very different. For us, we partnered with the health department, but we're very independent. They knew, so these two sites are the 5th and 6th consumption site that I've had a hand in either building and opening or have been involved with in some way. So it's a very weird sort of niche of expertise and knowledge that I have. My mother, you know, I'm sure is mortified that this is the career I went into, but I know a lot about this. So the city trusted me to do this. And the city had never done it before. So we were in a very unique position of saying, like, you got to let us do this. You got to let us lead here. And the city, to their credit, because health departments don't often do this, they said, okay, what can we do and how can we support? So what I really needed for them to do for us was to be our PR, to be our clout. So as the provider, I needed to focus on the ground. I needed to focus on making sure the service was tight, was run well, no one died, to really manage the day-to-day operation, because the stakes were very high. I mean, we did not know if the feds were going to come and throw us all in jail. We really had no idea. But what we did know was the operations had to be as close to flawless as they could be. What the health department had to do, while we were like this, just making sure things happened, was they had to have our back. So if you choose a provider that isn't the health department has to do the PR for that provider. They have to defend them in the public realm. They have to make sure that their key messages are strong. They have to robustly support them with funding if they can, give them the tools they need to be successful, and kind of run interference in the background. Because the health department has various echelons of power, they were able to do that for us at a fairly high level, so we could just focus on the work on the ground. And I think it's one of the most special things about the partnership and why it worked. So if they were starting to get flack from other city agencies, Department of Sanitation, Department of Transportation, or whatever, just as an example, or the state or the feds, we could send the New York City Health Department to speak for us, rather than feeling like we had to defend the turf, so to speak, while operating the service. Does that kind of make sense? So really mobilizing and weaponizing, in a positive sense, their power and position, both looking upward and looking outward, so that we could just focus on the work.
And you all are nonprofits?
We are a nonprofit. Yep. Yep.
All of the partnerships, then having the nonprofit be the lead, and then the infrastructure is kind of with that.
It's a good and interesting model. I think it's where Anna Jane is going as well in Rhode Island, because there's a nimbleness with a nonprofit that the bureaucracy of the health department can't always meet. So having the operator be a nonprofit embedded in the community is often way more effective than having it. And here's the other thing, just to talk about the elephant in the room. Having the nonprofit be the operator allows for much more flexible regulation. The minute you have a city agency operating a service like this that is federally illegal, the regulations are going to take the heart out of the initiative. And we really led the New York City Health Department in terms of the policies and procedures. We wrote them ourselves. The city health department did not write them. We handed them to them and said, this is what it's going to be. They had no feedback because they couldn't. If they'd written them on their own, and the state health department is working on writing some regulations now, but if we had waited and gone that process, the service would feel a lot different on the ground for participants, and it would have been a much longer process.
I was thinking, and I guess to Emily, this question is to you. Do we have to structure something at the state level for municipalities to actually have these kind of centers? Is there something that has to happen at the state level that would like actually create an infrastructure for a city or municipality to do that?
So, I mean, it could go either way, right? We could go the New York way, in which we decide, you know, this is such an essential service that the city is going to support it, and you have a nonprofit operator and you just do it, right? Based on, you know, right at this moment in time, it's less scary than it was a year ago prior to On Point doing this. So that's one way. As I think Anna Jane mentioned, so we have introduced legislation like Rhode Island has. So that was House Bill 123. Representative Armstrong introduced it in the last full session. And it actually passed through the House with bipartisan support. It just got log jammed in Senate Judiciary that year. Our sponsor has retired, unfortunately, and so we're looking for a new sponsor, and we're working with Department of Health and the governor's office to see whether, you know, there will be the political support to reintroduce that bill in the January session. So that is definitely happening concurrently. And as Anna Jane mentioned, how important having that local municipal support if we're going to actually get this state authorization bill through is really important. And I think, you know, what I have heard from the governor's office is basically, you know, in the past, not recently, that they would rather have a bill on their desk and they know that there are local jurisdictions that are interested in opening, right? They wouldn't want to just do it for the sake of doing it, that there's actually interest. There is interest. A provider in Albuquerque has reached out to me and we're in discussions. They are interested in opening one as well. So I have a feeling that, you know, this is again a good time right now, perhaps politically and historically, and I think there's, you know, political will, but it's a question of, you know, and I love, Kaylin, that you offered these different types of models around, you know, even the virtual. I was learning so much more tonight than I had, you know, virtual to mobile to these, you know, the hub and spoke, which is a really interesting model. So I think it just is something for us to think about. And also that community engagement piece is so essential. And, you know, we're going to be doing a lot of that. And so it'd be interesting to sort of hear from, well, essential to hear from people who are using drugs in Santa Fe about these types of services.
Can I say something a little unpopular? It's so contrary to our normal mode of, you have a potty training session happening in the background. It's so contrary to what we normally think of. We didn't do a ton of community engagement once we decided to open, because we didn't want to give the opposition too much time to mobilize against us. Knowing that we would bear the brunt of that backlash and we needed to be ready to deal with it head on when it happened and sort of accept responsibility for the fact that we didn't do community engagement. You're going to have to split the difference there. I think there is sometimes some wisdom in asking for forgiveness rather than permission, especially in this crisis. You know your stakeholders best. We use all kinds of cheesy analogies. There are some bears we're not going to poke, because why? If we're never going to neutralize somebody who positions themselves as the opposition, the strategy needs to shift, right? I can't necessarily waste my energy trying to flip somebody I can't flip. So ground softening was really key for us, but it wasn't the ultimate goal was not to get an emphatic yes from the neighborhoods where we were going to open. It was knowing the service would work, knowing it was going to be run like a clock, and then transparency. So when we opened, we had an open door policy for anyone was like, what the F did you just open in my neighborhood? And we would say, come and see it. It's not what you think. I kind of know what you think. Come in and see it, meet our staff, see how it works. Let's have a conversation. And it was, we've done, I think, over 300 tours since we opened, because we feel we have a responsibility as the only two in the country, and especially to the people who live in the neighborhoods where these are operating, to allow them to see what's happening, to allow them behind the curtain. So that was sort of our remedy to, I don't think we're not going to host town halls. We're not going to do any of that because it's going to be a no. Because the community is too afraid. They don't know the intervention. There's no example to look at in the States. They really fear it. They don't have enough information to give a yes. So I just leave that there as some food for thought. That's what we did in New York. There was definitely people who came out of the woodwork who were not happy. And we've worked really closely with them to bring them along. And we've had many, many successes. Are there still folks in Washington Heights and East Harlem who really wish we would pack up and leave? Absolutely. And there always will be, but it has more to do with stigma against people who use drugs generally than really our sites. So just leaving that there for what it's worth.
That's kind of a sticking point that we wouldn't be able to get into tonight. It's constant, and I agree with the community outreach piece, because there's been times of non-transparency in the city and bad behavior of historically, and so people don't trust government for a reason. So it's kind of this weird balance that I don't know how to solve at this point. But and then I guess the other question is maybe backing it up with data, and if people are saying, well, you shouldn't be feeding an addiction and all the rhetoric that actually occurs with opening centers like this, if there's actually data you're showing that a percentage of folks seeking rehabilitation that have been using the centers, and showing that there was this other transformation, as well as a percentage, or showing data that's there's a reduction of some kind of crime, because if people are trying to seek or speeding or supporting an addiction, and they're doing things outside of your center to try to support that, then I guess I would want to know if you're seeing a reduction of crime and being able to correlate that. And so maybe that's why PD supports it, but I don't know. These are just things like, I don't really have much time, but I'm just thinking of like data like that to show that
Totally, that is the question, right? Like that's what everybody wants. The only thing I would say is the reason I'm able to report to you really compelling utilization data is because it's immediate. The more long-term outcomes around stabilization, maintenance, safety, connection to care, transitioning away from drug use, that's going to take time to really be able to show that. Have we connected people to detoxification services and long-term treatment through the OPCs? Absolutely. I would say well over 100 times. Have we gotten people onto buprenorphine directly from the OPCs? Absolutely. Has it stuck? We'll see. Hard to say. What we do know about the people that are using our overdose prevention centers is 100% of them, literally 100% of them, have all been on buprenorphine, methadone, and in and out of treatment multiple times, sometimes 20 to 30 times, 100% of them. It's not a very popular thing to say, but abstinence fails every single time until the one time it doesn't. And that's really where harm reduction in these kinds of programs come in. So those longer term outcomes, I'm just as curious as you are as to what they look like a year in, a year and a half in. But it's a little too early to say. In terms of community impact, recidivism, safety, things like that, those are also being evaluated. Again, a little too early to say. And we have a compounding factor, which is this is the first summer in New York City after 2 years of repeated lockdowns. The city is a mess. It's an absolute mess. gun violence is up everywhere. Mental health is off the charts. It's like, and there's so much conflation with like the toughest summer New York City has seen in many years in terms of crime and other problems. There's a conflation of that. And then here we've opened 2 OPCs and this is our first summer. So in our particular neighborhoods, Harlem and Washington Heights, it's really trying to tease out what's us, what's that, what's other factors. But that's, you know, God bless our evaluators, because that's really their puzzle to solve.
Yes, a lot of things to think about, I guess, and just really impressed by your commitment to this work. It's amazing. And we're seeing the same kind of stuff happening in Santa Fe, you know, 84,000 population, and it's pretty depressing, to be honest with you. And as elected officials, it's hard to kind of navigate that right now.
Yeah, it's a tough summer for the country, really. It's kind of nuts everywhere.
So I have so many other thoughts, but I will stop at this point because we have some other items on the agenda. Just want to thank Anna Jane and Caitlin. Oh, I guess we have more questions here.
I had a couple questions. You talked about the level of medical training in the other models, but not really the peer model. Are they RNs as well?
So I want to be clear. I want to make a distinction. We personally, because there's no harm reduction university cranking out folks that know how to do this, and it's widely just not discussed in medical school or nursing school. They don't even touch on it. A little bit more and more these days, but as a general rule, nothing on harm reduction. So we, as an organization, train everyone in our overdose prevention centers to respond at the level of an RN. They're not RNs, but they're using the same tools and responding in the same way that a registered nurse would. This includes our folks who are actively using our consumer-led site as well. It's absolutely paired with being there at onset. It's the reason we've only had to call the ambulance 5 times. They are incredibly skilled at responding to very complex overdose presentations, polymodality. We're dealing with heart attacks, strokes, seizures, you name it. They know how to handle it. They also have the wisdom to know the limit of their abilities. And that's also a very big part of this work. So it's an intensive training that we developed and we provide. We use oxygen, oral and pharyngeal airways. We microdose naloxone. We use sort of a bevy of other tools. But our ability to be effective is really because we are there the second the medical emergency presents. We're not playing catch up with the body, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I don't know if you work under some kind of medical control with a MD, or if, because you're a nonprofit, maybe you get to act a little bit differently, but I was wondering if Anna Jane has some of those regulations that she has.
Here's the magic. Tell them, Anna Jane.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're alluding to, but we in our regulations, which I linked to just as like some sort of, here's some text that our state government has provided that may or may not be useful for either the city of Santa Fe or the state of New Mexico. But we need a medical director on paper. That person does not need to be in our site. And my hunch is that they will not need to be very present, because our staff who are going to be all trained in how to do this work will know how to do it. Sort of what Caitlin was saying, and then like not need medical oversight in the way that someone would need at a hospital or whatnot. So we are confident that yes, we will have a medical director as per the regulations, and all of that, check all those boxes, make sure that person is there if and when we do need them. However, we don't expect that we will need them because of the proven interventions that already exist.
We also have a medical director, but the medical director does not technically oversee the site. And this is what's really interesting. We have a few EMTs that work for us, and we had to retrain the EMTs because the EMTs arrive at overdoses at a very different point in time than we do. Nothing the EMT knew in terms of how to respond applied in our setting. Same went for our medical director. She is wonderful, highly skilled, incredible doctor, didn't know how to respond in this setting. There is nothing in the States to point to. It is the uncharted frontier. And so our medical director really deferred to me on how do you intervene in this setting? So looking for a provider, a medical director who is supportive of the work, but also allows for the work to happen is going to be really important, because a lot of doctors get really quite precious about this, and nurses. These are clinical skills. This is the wheelhouse of providers. And that's not who you're going to want to look for in a clinical partner for this kind of work.
Yeah, thanks. And then Kaylin said that she has some freedom because she's a nonprofit, and Anna Jane, you have more regulations to go through. How are you going to get by people wanting to visit your site, wanting to go there, knowing that you're regulated by government, really?
Yes, that's a good question. Our staff has really, really, really deep connections. Like many of our staff used to use drugs with our clients, right? They grew up in the same neighborhoods. They oftentimes are like literally family with people. And so there is a lot of trust, and there is, some of my coworkers are literally with our clients, like as they're dying in the hospital. Like the level of trust is really, really, really deep. So will we be regulated? Yes, we are a nonprofit that has, over a decade of experience in harm reduction. So yes, we will be regulated. We will make sure we meet those requirements. We will have a license, but we will not be a government institution. We will not be a hospital. We will not be those things. And so currently our drop-in centers don't have to go through any regulatory processes, although we are funded by the Department of Health. The Department of Health shows up not infrequently because we do have a good working relationship. So I don't anticipate it will change just because we do have to submit an application. And our Department of Health, as I mentioned, has been incredibly supportive, both publicly and privately. They've had our backs with the governor's office. They've had our backs with the media. They've had our backs around funding allocations. Like they've really, really been supportive, and that is a huge blessing. And again, because we're Rhode Island, we're tiny, everything happens at the state level. We don't have a city level Department of Health. We don't have a district attorney, so everything happens at the state level there as well. And so it might be a different type of scenario than a state like New Mexico. I know Santa Fe is a relatively small compared to a place like New York, but obviously the state is huge. So.
Thanks. And then do you, both your groups plan on, or do you hand out naloxone as people are leaving, or can they request it if they're leaving, or is the thought that you come do your, whatever you're gonna do there, and then you're under your kind of watchful eye until they leave?
For us, it really, as we get to know people, I mean, we are literally taping naloxone to some people's sleeves. People overdose for lots of reasons, suicide attempts, just not knowing how to dose properly, all kinds of reasons. So we go through just piles and piles of naloxone, partially because we're not open 24 hours yet. And looking at the Washington Heights program, and stigma is very, very real. We've lost two staff from the Washington Heights consumer-led program. One of our RPICs died of an overdose, not at the site. And another one of our staff died of an overdose in the building beside the Overdose Prevention Center, directly attached to it. And it's this thinking of, I'm a staff, that's not for me, that's for them. Stigma is incredibly real. And I share that to be very, very transparent that yes, we have these beautiful sites and we've saved so many lives, but we've also lost people. So one of our staff died in the building beside the Overdose Prevention Center when we were open. And she used pills, and she bought some pills off the street, and she thought, I'm not an injector, I don't need to use in the OPC. and she died. And then 4 other people, including the one staff I mentioned, all died in Washington Heights while we were closed overnight in the subway stations and parks directly around the OPC. So we took great care of them during the day. We weren't overnight and they died. So yeah, a lot of naloxone still, and still a lot of heartache, to be honest.
Anna Jane, you guys will pass it out as well.
Yeah, I mean, we already pass out a lot of it, and I anticipate that we would continue. And especially like we know that we are going to have to start with limited hours. Like we know that we are going to, we'd rather do something well for a fewer number of hours and have adequate staffing than be like, oh, we can just stretch people out. Especially this work is really, really hard. It's really traumatic. And so we want to be honest and upfront about that, and not completely burn people out. So with that, you know, understanding that we won't be open all the time, that we will need to continue distributing supplies as we already do.
I really appreciate that you said that. Staffing our OPCs is opt-in, opt-out. So staff are allowed to move out of the OPC if they feel like I need a minute, I gotta tap out. Sitting, as Anna Jane said, sitting and witnessing people consuming drugs for hours and hours and hours every week is very, very hard. It's a level of intimacy and witnessing that can be quite draining. And so staff do need to have the fluidity and the option of stepping back for their own mental health.
Thanks. So before becoming a city councilor, I was a paramedic firefighter here in the city. So I've seen firsthand what you guys are talking about. So thank you and keep fighting the good fight. This has been a long time coming. So good luck to both of you, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Emily, for organizing the panel too. Super helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, Caitlin and Anna Jane, thank you so much. And look forward to working with both of you around the country as these start becoming more and more, well, the stigma will be erased, right?
Yes. Good luck to you all, and keep in touch. And remember, you're welcome to come and visit anytime.
Thank you. Thanks for
All
joining
right.
us.
All right. Speak
Thank you so
soon.
much.
Bye. Good night, Anna Jane. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Oh, wow. That was a lot. It was good stuff. Thanks again, Emily. Appreciate it. We're on to an action item or discussion.
I think, 1 second, Chris, we have Marcela who has a question.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. That was really great. And maybe this is something we can discuss in our working group. I'm wondering if you have fleshed out or what we need to get there. And I don't remember if it was so fleshed out, like what the path to something like this is for appropriate to Santa Fe. And if we got to that in the MDS strategy, I don't think it was that fleshed out. And so I'm wondering what we need to create that viable plan now. I mean, what, no, understanding what funding sources is, understanding what services are provided here from the recovery community. I mean, all of these things, like how do we get from these ideas to this is a smart, viable path in Santa Fe for our report?
Yeah, I think there are 2 concurrent paths, and maybe we can talk about it in our subcommittee. But I think there's one about supporting what's happening at a state level to make this, have some cover, which I think is probably where most local jurisdictions are going to want to have that authorization. But also, I think there's so much work that has to be done to even start thinking about implementing and standing up and what model might be most appropriate. And so, yeah, I have some thoughts that I'm happy to share like in our subcommittee, and then we can, when that is appropriate, to bring back to the full group.
Thanks. I didn't mean you had to tell us all right now, but
I'll make it up, but
there are a lot of options, and it will take a lot of work. And so is it the working group like they came up with, and I forget which community where they, created, I think it was in Rhode Island. I mean, what is Like, I'm just thinking again towards what are concrete recommendations that we're gonna make at the end of the year. So thank you. Thank you for being on top of it.
Thanks, Marcella. Any other hands up or any other questions that? Don't see any. All right, we're on to, for our agenda, an action item for discussion, which is approval of meeting format through the term of the task force. So Julie basically put this on to see if we're okay meeting the way we are right now with in-person and Zoom option both available, or we'd rather just all meet in person or go back to all on Zoom. I don't, can we go back to all on Zoom?
I don't know, but essentially we have to go through this route to verify that we all want to continue having this meeting format of hybrid, and we have to vote on it. And we actually have to track the votes, Valeria, of people saying yay or nay, so yes or no, so.
So is the feeling that this seems to work, I think, or if you can make it, you make it, and if you can't, you get on Zoom and be able to participate in that format. Is that what everybody wants to see moving forward?
Yeah,
Let's see.
that works really well for me. You know, it is my intent to actually leave work and not have to work after this, after our meeting. And hopefully I'll be able to do that more often, but I would like to be there in person at times. And I appreciate the flexibility of being able to attend virtually.
Yeah, Bruce gave a thumbs up, Andy did.
I think we need the.
A motion, do we need a motion?
Yeah,
Okay, I move that we continue with this hybrid approach for the time being until we decide not to.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor, signify by, I guess, because it's on. Annie?
Aye.
Hold on, because it's partially on Zoom, we have to do a voice vote, so Lydia knows how every individual person voted, so.
I
Bruce,
got
how- Bruce, how do you vote?
Aye. For me.
Okay, Gino,
Yes, aye.
Annie,
Aye.
Emily,
Yes, aye.
Ella,
Aye.
Renee?
yes,
And I'm a yes as well. So we'll continue with this hybrid process through the term of the task force. Thank you. Next is working group updates. I don't know if you speaking for your group, Renee?
sure. Just wanted to let our working group know that after our presentation at the city council meeting, to update folks on where we were at and with the working groups, it stirred a little bit of energy around the fact that we didn't feel like there were some questions we still had remaining. And we've actually, I outlined it very generally in the presentation, but in our actual quarterly report, it talked about some of the things we're still seeking. And I kind of just try to synthesize it. We should probably look at all those questions and make sure that, like, the follow-up that we wanted a while ago, that we can just get that, because I think staff is ready to look at it. And then now that we have Julie to help us navigate that, if it doesn't fall under like PD or fire department and we need to get HR to help us with some data, that we have, hopefully Julie will be able to navigate and help us with that. So I guess just wanted to let you know that we were in conversation with Kira and she wanted to follow up with us, but I think it probably makes more sense for us to follow up as a working group with staff again, so that we can kind of get all those points cleared and understand where we can get info and where we can't. And so I think it'll be good. And also the other thing, Annie, if you wanted to share what our next, if we've heard any from NACOL, which is I am forgetting the acronym, help me out here.
National Association of Civilian Oversight Group, something like that. I can look it up, but I have not heard back. I called them and emailed them. And I don't know if they followed up directly with Val. Have they? I think we need a confirmation. I mean, I forwarded you guys what they sent me, which was, saying they were gonna present in August, but have not heard back since then.
Okay, so we'll just have to keep trying to make sure, because that would be the next presentation for our next meeting. And that's the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. Mouthful. So that's the plan, y'all, for them to be able to present at the next meeting, but we'll keep you updated as we try to keep outreach. Was there anything else you all in our working group, and practices?
Oops.
Not from that, I'm not from their group, so I'll wait.
Lydia, did you have a question on our working group?
Oh, no, I thought I saw Marcela's hand go up again. I think I
You
have a
did.
little.
You did, but I'm just waiting.
And I apologize, I have to go, but maybe Counselor, we can set up a working group meeting. I think might be helpful just to check.
I
in
think just a
sometime.
follow-up, like to say, like what we're thinking, and if you can look at, I'll have to send you the document that we put together. I don't know if all of you had actually looked at it in detail, and it might help to just narrow down some of those still remaining data points, information that we're seeking, so.
That sounds smart. No, that sounds great. Well, thank you all. That was amazing, Emily. Really eye-opening in many ways.
Yeah.
Thanks, Annie. Bye.
Do you have anything else? Marcella, did you have your hand up? Or you were waiting?
Yeah, I'm setting up a panel with the folks from Longmont, Colorado, and also the court. It's the New York Center for Court Innovation that has just sort of a community court in Red Hook. And I am unclear in that big document which days are available. Because I don't understand why some meetings are being canceled or not. And so I'm assuming that the dates that you put in there, Valeria, are the dates. And so if you could help me figure out the best late August, early September date that is free, that would be great. So that I can start putting that together. We
Yeah.
already have people who are excited about presenting.
Beautiful.
Marcella, is there a way, like say the NA Cole doesn't work out, that could work that slot for I mean, that's in 2 weeks, so I don't know if that gives you enough time.
Probably not. I can check. But the truth is I'm not really meeting with one of them until the 12th. So that's probably not going to work, but it was unclear to me if there was this early September date that was free or if that meeting was getting moved. Anyway, I don't have to belabor the point here. If you could just help me figure that out offline, Valeria, that would be great.
Like you had a slot, but I don't have the calendar in front of me, so Valeria can check for us.
And then there was like one that was in 2 slots and 3 slots. And so maybe I just haven't checked recently enough as it gets cleared up.
Cool. Anything on the other task, or sorry, the other working group updates, anything?
No, we haven't really met. We should probably try to set up a meeting at some point.
I suggest you all try to connect soon because the UNM contract is gonna kind of dovetail with your working group, and we need to figure out if it makes sense for Dr. Sanchez to come here to talk to us about that, or to work with you all kind of. I don't know what that looks like, I guess.
Do we have to wait until the contract is signed and ready to go? Because I know that there were issues with it, because we're happy to meet with him to come up with a proposal for the whole group. And I know that we already did that, but to polish even more that proposal and get it ready with timelines and everything, and then bring it to the next meeting.
I think he already has something structurally ready to go, is what he told me, and just needs to know where he fits into this. even though we're waiting for the contract to be signed officially, but structurally, he could probably talk to it, you know, informally.
I think so. He already has before, so I don't see
Right.
why.
Yeah, no, we worked very closely, our group with him on that. And so we have that. I don't know if anyway, we can discuss it with Emily and Monica and Mary Louise, just on how to refine it for the particular moment that we're dealing with right now. And the time period that he's going to have to be able to do it.
Well, yes, and if we need more time, we will take it and extend our work time.
Yay.
Any matters from the task force? Don't see any. Just a reminder, our next meeting's Tuesday, August 16th. 5:30, and again, we'll either, if you can meet live, we'll be here at Market Station, which is at the rail yard.
It's a great space.
Nice space.
We'll validate your parking.
If you
I
can
like
only-
that there are only 2 of you in there. Maybe I'll show up.
Yeah, last time it was a full house,
Yeah.
but yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you all. for
Have a
your
great
work. Thank you,
evening.
Melody. I appreciate you. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Chris,
Bye.
quick question, Chris.
Yeah.
I just have a quick question about the public safety meeting on the 16th also.